From the inner sense of time comes the ancient poet's rhyme, bringing us the master key to open up the mystery. From the depth of time and space, we arrive in quiet grace, finding what is meant to be as we explore the mystery, pouring forth from days gone by. We can hear the poet sigh from the depth of ecstasy, moving into mystery. Hello and welcome again to Creative Connections. I'm your host, Gary Blanchard, and today I have two guests. I have Gail Olmstead and Ed Londergan, two local authors. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good to be back.
Nice to be here.
It's good to have you back, and it's great to meet you. Writing tends to be a rather solitary endeavor.
You could say that.
So I was really pleasantly surprised when you guys wanted to come on jointly and talk about your work.
Yeah, well, it is solitary, but now and then you have to get out with other people. Other writers always help to maintain your sanity. You know that you're not just bouncing around a room doing the wrong thing at the wrong time. So yeah, Gail and I met, I don't remember how we met, I don't know, anyway. So we got together with another writer, Tracy Ryan, down in Sturbridge a couple of years ago, and started talking about things that writers do and how we have a lot of stuff in common. And then we met last month, 2 months ago? Whatever.
I think it was last month, most recent.
And Gail was telling us about her book, and I was talking about my new book that's coming out. And that's when I thought of you. It's like, you know what? Let's get hold of Gary and see if he'd like us to come on.
Well, I'm always happy to have you on, and wonderful to have you on. So tell me, your latest book, Landscape of a Marriage, is about your husband's family.
Yes.
But your husband's family is somewhat known.
Yes. It's funny, I've seen quotes or I've seen comments attributed to Frederick Law Olmstead saying he's the least known, most well-known person because everybody has, not everybody, a lot of people recognize the name, and you say Central Park and they say, oh yeah, okay, Central Park, or they live near another park of his or whatever. So everybody knows a little, and there are some wonderful biographies written just about him. But I chose this book, I chose to write it as a novel, and I wrote it from his wife's perspective because he was a lifelong bachelor. Everybody assumed he was never going to be married, and he was nearly 40. His younger brother died, and he promised him on his deathbed that he would take care of his widow, and he married Mary a year later, adopted her 3 children, and together they had 4 more, and they were married for 44 years.
Okay.
So I imagined it as, like what would she say about this whole experience and traveling around the country with this man and, building these parks. And he was, very larger than life personality. So
and I'm sure at the time, he must have been pretty much a superstar.
It became, Central Park was his first project and most well-known, probably not his largest one, but his most well-known. And that's about the time that he was getting married to Mary. So his fame started to increase over the years, and it was hard for his family because he was suddenly quite in demand. And they obviously supported him, and then his younger sons joined him in the business years later. But it's a landscape of a marriage. It's bumps and unexpected things happen over a 44-year period. But I saw them as a marriage of convenience that became, evolved into something much, much more.
That's great.
So that was my take on it.
Okay. And you tend to write historical books.
So far, although I have a contemporary fiction that I'm wrapping up that hopefully will be going somewhere.
Okay.
And I have a follow-up to that that's in process. Hopefully it will go somewhere too. But the new one is about Bathsheba Spooner.
Okay.
Now, it's kind of a local story. Bathsheba Spooner was the daughter of Timothy Ruggles, who was a general in the French and Indian War. He was president of the Stamp Act Congress. He was Chief Justice of the Court of Common Pleas in Massachusetts. He was a leading loyalist during the Revolution, wealthy, smart. He was kind of the epitome of the upper class. And Bathsheba was like her father. She was strong-willed, smart, staunch British loyalist. Didn't take any guff from anybody. But she was forced to marry a man she didn't want, she didn't love, Joshua Spooner. And she put up with his emotional abuse for 10 years. And then a young Continental soldier came into her life in 1777. And she discovered this wealthy mother of 3 small children that she was pregnant by the soldier. And when that happened, her thoughts turned to murder. And the young man, who was 16 when they got together, and she was 32, he didn't dispatch her husband. He ended up fleeing for home to Ipswich, and she recruited the 2 British prisoners of war. When Burgoyne surrendered at Saratoga, the idea was that they would march all the soldiers to Boston and put them on ships to England. And the Continental Congress kind of went, whoa, why are we going to pay to put them all the way back to England for them to come back and fight us? So they just left these 6,000 soldiers in Boston. No one wanted to house or feed them, so they wandered. And a lot of these guys had skills, blacksmiths, carpenters, tinsmiths, what have you. And 2 of them made their way to Brookfield, and they knew that Bathsheba was a loyalist. So they approached her, they became friendly, and she convinced them to murder her husband. The night they were going to do it, the kid comes back to claim her as his own and challenge her husband to a duel. They kill him and stuff them down a well. Now, they're not the brightest bunch because they dump him down the only well on the farm, which actually is right by the road. And you can go visit the well right now. I mean, it's there. It's in Brookfield. She paid the soldiers with her husband's money, effects, clothing, shoe buckles, watches, all that had JS inscribed on them. Huh. They go to Worcester, they start drinking. Someone overhears them, they're arrested. They implicate her. She said, I had nothing to do with it. They did it. They said, we wouldn't have done it. She's the one who masterminded it. They were all arrested, tried, and convicted and sentenced to hang. Bathsheba then says, I'm pregnant, and asks for a stay of execution. Well, they had her examined by a group of midwives who hated Bathsheba and her father because they were loyalists, and now she was 5 months along. You see a pregnant woman 5 months along, you know she's pregnant. And they said, no, you're not. And she asked for another exam, and they gave her one. Half said yes, half said no. It was headed up by her brother-in-law, Dr. Green, who family actually knew Frederick Law Olmstead later on. But that was turned down too by the Executive Council, which was headed by her dead husband's stepbrother, John Avery. So he gave the big thumbs down. So she and her unborn child were hanged along with the other 3 on July 2nd, 1778 in what's now Washington Square in Worcester. And because of all of the uproar about her father, her sister Mary did not want Bathsheba buried in the Brookfield Cemetery because her dead husband, her murdered husband, was buried there too. So yeah, it could have been a problem. So her sister Mary said that she wanted her buried on her estate, up in Worcester, the Green Estate. And they buried her in a grave, which is an anonymous grave. And in 1905, the Green Estate became Green Hill Park when the family donated it to the city of Worcester. So Bathsheba and her unborn child lie somewhere in the park, somewhere. I think she's under the 6th fairway, but I'm not sure. And that's the story of Bathsheba Spooner.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's an amazing story that, you know, locals know.
But not many other people.
But not many other people.
No.
And it sounds like something that people, you know, it's got sex, violence, all the things it said.
Wealth, power, love, lust, murder, and revenge. You can't get any more all-American than that, you know? And yeah, it has all the elements of a great story, and it's fascinated people for what, 242 years or something now?
Yeah.
243 years. And I know other people who wrote books about this, 2 nonfiction books, which one is very good, one is okay. And then 2 people who wrote historical fiction books, both of which are just okay, and they admit it. And I heard this story and I just latched onto it years ago, and I had to write it to get it out of my system. And I actually was working on a fiction story, contemporary fiction story, which I put aside to write this.
Okay.
And I tried to get some traction with agents, and I sent it out, and a bunch of them came back and said, it's written in the 3rd person, write it in the 1st person, have more effect. So I rewrote the entire thing.
Wow.
I did the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's the comments you get. And it worked, didn't it? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think it did.
Yeah.
I felt much more connected with the main character.
Yeah, I did too.
Writing in the first person, and it comes naturally to me. And for some reason,
Me
I
too.
fought it, and I thought, no, this should be a 3rd person narrative. This should be, you know, just a little
'Cause I
bit
can
more
tell
formal.
everything. I
and
can
yeah,
tell it all.
right. I don't have
Yeah.
to. It doesn't have to be just what she
can be
knows and what
omniscient.
she's exactly.
Yes.
Yes, the all-powerful narrator.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
but I rewrote it during the first few weeks of COVID. I was just convinced that that was what I needed to do, and yeah, I'm very glad that I did.
Yeah,
very
I
glad that
do.
I
When
did.
you're putting yourself into the mind of the character, do you find that there are advantages and disadvantages to that?
For me, there's only advantages. I mean, mainly, I think, especially in this case, I mean, this was a lovely woman who loved her family, who, you know, who put them, her children and her husband above everything. And she also had good friends. So for me, it was a natural kind of position to step into. But yeah, I think that, you know, I had like an image board. I took, you know, I had pictures of the clothing that women would wear in the 1860s, 70s, 80s. I figured out what they would serve at dinner parties, and some of it I used and some of it I didn't, but it gave me, you know, kind of put me into that mindset of, you know, what she might be experiencing, because it's all the, you know, there's so much history that went on during that time period between the Civil War, women's suffrage movement, the gold rush. I mean, it just didn't end in terms of, my job was to figure out what her reaction would be to all of this as she was, again, traveling around the country, living like a bit of a gypsy at times with up to 5 children at one time.
Okay.
So it, but you know, she was I liked her. I felt from what I could learn about her, I thought she was a practical person. She was going to make the best of the situation, and she was also convinced that she was going to get her new husband to fall in love with her. That was her right up front. She just said, nope, I'm not going to have that kind of a marriage where, you know, it's just in name only, where this is going to be, you know, for love or nothing. And so she lays it right out to him right at the beginning, and she's successful in doing it.
Had a girl.
Yeah, go marry.
Right there, but I had to get into the head of an 18th century woman, which was a little bit difficult. I mean, her pedigree. Her father was Timothy Ruggles, as I mentioned. Her mother was Bathsheba born Newcomb. Now, her family, mother's family, founded the town of Bourne. They were the original settlers down there. Bathsheba's mother married, I think it was John Newcomb, who was a wealthy guy. He owned a big tavern, which is now the Newcomb Ruggles Tavern in Sandwich. He owned a couple shops and whatever. He died, and he left Bathsheba's mother with everything. She ran the tavern, she ran the shops, and she had 7 kids by him. When she ended up marrying Timothy Ruggles, she had an additional 7 kids. We only have 14 kids over her lifetime, but her mother was pretty tough too. But one of the problems with Bathsheba is there's very little physical evidence of her. There's only 2 examples of her writing. There are no drawings. There's only one portrait, one sketch really of her father. So there's not a lot to go on. So a lot of it is either things that were pulled from like the minutes of the trial, or notes from some of the judges. One of the interesting things was one of the judges of her trial was Jedediah Foster, who lived in West Brookfield on Foster Hill. It's named after him. And she lived in Brookfield Center, basically. So they were about a mile and a half from each other. They knew each other fairly well. And in the book, I have him attending her wedding, because that would have been natural.
Right.
However, when she killed her husband, he was one of the judges at the trial, and he convicted her and sentenced her to death, which is kind of a wild thing.
Yeah.
So anyway, it was kind of tough getting into the head of an 18th century woman. But once I got there, it was the research and stuff. That was a blast.
Yeah.
What would women wear in those days?
Right.
How would it happen? I actually found the location of their house in Hardwick. They had an estate. Timothy Ruggles' old boy, he got a grant of 10,000. Was it 10,000 acres? 64,000 acres, 10 square miles, centered on Hardwick for he and 23 other Ruggles-related families.
Yeah.
That's why if you go to Hardwick now, every other family is a Ruggles family. They're all out there. But her father, being the big loyalist he was, there was a gigantic boulder in the field near the house, and he had a huge hole drilled into it with another hole on the side coming out this way. And he had a huge pine tree with a Union Jack flying on it. And the location of the house was on this big hill. You drive around, you can see it for miles. So there was, a 100-foot tree with a Union Jack on it that you could see for 20 miles. So that's the kind of guy Timothy was.
Okay.
It was kind of in your face. But yeah, it was fascinating doing all the research and seeing all the things. But
So once it's written, how do you get it out to people?
oh, that's where the work starts.
Yeah.
Writing
The
is
book is
easy
written
part.
good now.
Yeah,
now.
okay, fine, now.
I think it's a series of activities, and we've both been there a number of times already now. So some of it becomes a little bit easier the more you do it, but not completely. I had some beta readers, very early readers, a couple friends, but mostly just people whose opinions I trusted, who were willing to read through the entire manuscript and give me feedback. And I don't see how you could write a book today without getting that kind of feedback. It wasn't editing. Like I said, don't look for typos, don't look for, tell me where there's a break in the storyline. Tell me where there's loose ends that never get woven into the fabric. And they found them, and
They always do.
they always do. So that to me was the first part of it. Then I had an editor who I found through social media, very well versed in historical fiction, which was new for me. My first 4 books are all contemporary. So with historical, I really felt like I needed as much help as I could get. And that's my biggest advice that I would give to any writers is, hire an editor.
Find a good editor.
Not just a proofreader, not just someone to find typos, but hire a good editor who can help you, because you can't do your own editing. You just can't. I could read something 100 times and I'd miss, something every single time. So then once I had it edited and read by betas, and I felt it was reasonably good, my last publisher had gone out of business, so I needed to find somebody new. And I started querying agents and publishers. Some publishers require an agent. Some of the smaller presses do not. So I just went back and forth with that process for months, honestly. And then I had a few offers, and I just narrowed it down, and I looked at what they had published. I looked at how many authors they had, how many authors had published 2 and 3 and 4 books with them, because to me that told that they were, good to deal with,
right.
Honest, and doing a reasonably good job. So I narrowed it. I found the one I wanted to work with, signed the contract, and 8 months later, have a book. So yeah, it's a long process.
Oh,
I mean,
it can be.
It can be really long. Yeah.
And my path was a little different, similar but different. I had my first, when it was in the third person, I had that edited, which was okay. I've used the editor before. I won't again because the process has changed now for me. But I have a writing group I started, and they and a couple other folks were my beta readers, and I told them, rip it to shreds, make me bleed. And they did. And they did a hell of a job at it. Once I had that, I started querying agents. And I had 5 or 6 responses. I went to a writer's workshop in Boston, and you could buy 10 minutes with agents to sit down and give me a pitch, which I did. And the very first one, 7 minutes in, said, send me the full manuscript. I want to read this. I was in seventh heaven. Nothing ever happened with it. But after all of that,
Worst.
I sent it to a guy in New York, Al Zuckerman, who's a big-time agent. He started one of the big agencies years ago. He actually had a posting up on Publishers Marketplace saying, I'm looking for new authors because I've been in this business so long, a lot of the ones I've had have died. So here's what I want you to tell me. Send me a letter, 3 paragraphs. I did. He came back, I said, give me the first 100 pages, which I did. And then he came back and said, here's 12 suggestions for you. So I made those changes. He didn't want it back, but I made those changes. And started sending it out again, and I was getting nowhere. But there are 3 writers groups in the western part of the state, and they have an annual conference. Well, this year it was virtual, but one of the women, Mary Bisbee Beaker's her name, she's a publishing consultant, an agent publishing consultant. So there was the opportunity to submit your manuscript for Mary to review, and she was going to pick 3 of them to help get them published. Well, mine was one of the 3 out of 80 submissions, which was great. So I've been working with Mary since then, and she put me on to a publisher who's actually in Amherst. Of all, you query all over the world, right. And all of a sudden it's in Amherst.
In your own backyard.
But they're absolutely wonderful. So they have a designer. I mean, you talk about the proofreading process. There was an editor they had who went through this 3 times, 3 passes at it. Then it went to a proofreader. And the proofreader came back with a list of 144 things. And it's like, I've read this, I've had beta readers, edited, and now you're coming up with, and you have to go by word for word, line by line to make all of those changes. And that was through 3 iterations too, and now it's final, and it's going to the printer probably Friday.
Okay.
Yay.
Fingers crossed, so we'll see. But I hired Mary, because this is probably the best story I will ever have to tell. Maybe, I don't know. But it captures people's interest. So I'm just going whole hog on this one. I hired Mary as my publicist, and she's going to try and set up speaking events and book signings and everything else. So I don't know. We'll see. I am going to kick it off in Hardwick, which is where Bathsheba grew up.
Okay.
At the town hall, date yet to be determined, but that's going to be my first event. My first presentation and book signing will be there.
Great.
It just seems appropriate, you know?
Now, you both have previous books.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So
tell me a little bit about your earlier books, which I see you were nice enough to bring.
I brought them, and my first 4 books were all contemporary. Contemporary women's fiction, technically, although I have had male readers. And I think the tough thing about getting started is you really need to identify your genre and who you're writing for. And I think with Jeep Tour, which was my first book, based in inspired by a trip that my family and I took to Sedona, with Jeep Tour, it was all over the map. I think it's a good story. I'm very proud of it. But it had women's fiction, it had romance, it was a little bit of chick lit, some kind of change of life, second chances, starting over kind of themes, which were a little bit heavier, more literary fiction. I tried to do it all because honestly, I thought this would be the only book I would ever write. So I put it all in there just in case, and then 3 more books followed before I started this story, because I felt, like you said, I was working on something else, right, and this story just kind of evolved, and I thought, okay, I would love to read that story, so I have to write it, because it's there's very little out there about Mary. But I think with all the books, including my historical book, the theme of second chances, of starting over, of I don't like where I'm at in my life and I need to make a change. So the women in all 5 books vary in age, in profession, in demographics, income, family size. Some are married, divorced, widowed, but they all have one thing in common, which is that they all want more from their lives and for their families or their relationships. And so even with the switch, I was asked, well, why'd you make the switch to historical? And mainly because I wanted to write this story. But other than the research, which was daunting, it really, the conversations that were had, the problems that they faced, with balancing family and children and work demands and moving, I think they're as relevant today as they were 150 years ago. Yeah. So it wasn't as big of a stretch, really. At least for me, that was my experience. But
right. Okay. In my 2, Devil's Elbow was number 1. And then The Long Journey Home was that. This is really about the first and second settlements of Brookfield. From 1670 to 1675, and this one is through 1725. I follow the 2 main characters, Jack and Becky Parker, basically through their lives. And it's fascinating because a lot of it was a matter of life and death. I mean, you lived on the frontier. The first settlement at Brookfield on what's now Foster Hill, you were 60 miles from Marlborough, 30 miles or so from Springfield. You were out in the middle of nowhere. You had 3 Indian tribes, clans really, near you, and yeah, you were kind of on your own. So it was a fascinating story to be able to tell this, and I really bring the readers through everything up until the end of the second settlement in West Brookfield. However, I had other people say, you know what, continue the Parker family story. Don't stop here. Well, to tell it like some of James Michener's books, where he tells generation after, it would be yay big, it would be 1,000 pages. I'd probably be dead before it finished, and no one would read it. So I decided not to do that. So the book I put aside is continuing the Parker family story, and that's really a retired college professor inherits the family farm, finds that they were the original hoarders. They never threw anything out but the trash. And he tells the family story through all of the research he does into all the stuff at the house. In the meantime, his long-lost brother, who's been gone for 12 years, comes home. He falls in love with the local high school art teacher. The son his brother didn't know he had found Will, his uncle, and Will brings him into the house. So it's a whole bunch of different stuff. So now that I've done with Bathsheba Spooner, the writing, I'm back onto this other one.
You're done with her.
Okay.
Yeah, I just don't know when to stop. I really don't, So, but yeah, it's a blast. Writing's a lot of fun.
It really is. It really is.
You get a fire. I don't know how else to describe it.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you put pen to paper.
Yeah. How you know, as a performer, you know, I do a song, people clap.
Mm-hmm.
How do you get feedback? How do you find out what people think of what you're doing?
Reviews, certainly.
Mm-hmm.
Sales tell you,
Mm-hmm.
you know, if there's interest or lack thereof. Some reviews are remarkably detailed in terms of what they like, what they don't like, and you know, feedback from other authors. I don't know. We've found that the writing community is just so generous with their time, with their resources, with their expertise on things. I've learned more about this. I've been doing this now. Well, Jeep Tour came out 7.5 years ago, so I've been writing for 10 years. I've learned more from other authors, similar genres, different genres, most of whom I've never met and never will meet, but through social media, through email, through Zoom, teleconferencing, whatever. People are remarkable in terms of what they will share with you to help you, because books are just, they're you know, it's not competitive. You know, if you read a good book, you'll buy another good book.
We have run out of time. It's been such a great conversation.
We can talk forever.
And I hope to have you both back.
Thank you.
And I want to thank you all for tuning in. See you next time. From the inner sense of time comes the ancient poet's rhyme, bringing us the master key to open up the mystery. From the depth of time and space, we arrive in quiet grace, finding what is meant to be as we explore the mystery, pouring forth from days gone by. We can hear the poet sigh from the depth of ecstasy, moving into mystery.